Hello again and welcome back to the channel. This is Michael from TOEFLresources.com. In today's video, I'm happy to share the 2024 version of my guide to TOEFL Speaking Question 4. In today's video, I'm going to start by giving you a sample question and talk about how the question is designed. After that, I'll talk about how to take notes and answer the question properly. I'll also give you a template that you can use on test day. And if you stick around all the way to the end, I'll talk about some of the most common topics in this part of the test. So first of all, we'll get started with the basics. And actually, this question's a little bit easier to understand than the other integrated questions because there's not much going on here. Basically, you'll spend 1 or 2 minutes listening to a lecture about an academic topic. And that lecture is going to describe 2 aspects of some concept or process. And don't worry, I'll explain a bit more about what that means in just a moment. After that, you'll spend 60 seconds answering a question. You'll have 20 seconds preparing your answer, and then you'll speak for 1 minute. I've highlighted the 20 here because that's a little bit less preparation time than in the other integrated speaking questions. But before we go on, I really want you to remember what I call the rule of 2. In this question, the lecture is going to be about 2 features of something, or maybe 2 adaptations of something, or 2 changes that occurred during a specific event, or 2 ways that something is done, 2 characteristics, or 2 advantages of something. Basically, it's about 2 things. If you keep that in mind, when you're at the test center taking the test, I think you'll have an easier time understanding the lecture and probably an easier time planning your answer. So let's take a look at a sample that kind of shows you what I mean in a bit more detail. So here's a lecture. Now I'm not going to read it all out, and if you want to, you can just pause the video and check it out. But this is a very typical lecture for this part of the test. Now, of course, on test day, you can only listen to the lecture. You're not going to get a transcript, but I've given you the transcript here to emphasize how the question is designed. So there's a few things I want to draw your attention to. First up, the lecture starts with a sort of introduction, which explains what the topic is. In this case, it's about desert environments and animals that live there. And it says specifically, to survive in such harsh conditions, desert animals have developed a variety of specialized adaptations. So when you hear that, you're going to be like, aha, this is a lecture about 2 adaptations that animals use to survive in places with a lot of heat. After that, the lecture describes each of those 2 adaptations, one after another. So the first one is specialized heat regulation. I've underlined it there. After it mentions what that adaptation is, there's sort of a definition and description of it, which I've highlighted in green, and then you get an example of it. In this case, it's an example of a type of fox, which has some adaptations that regulate its heat. After that, it mentions the second adaptation, which is burrowing behavior, and once again, it describes it, and then it gives an example, in this case, the kangaroo rat. Now, much like in question 3, all of these details are pretty important. They're all useful. They can all go into your answer. Depending on how quickly you speak and how many notes you can take, it's all pretty relevant. But I guess what I want to draw your attention to is that there's 5 things that your answer should contain. Number 1, you need to know what the 2 things are. Number 2, you need to know what the first thing is specifically. And then you need the example of it. That's number 3. Number 4, you need the second thing. And number 5, you need the example of the second thing. So these are the 5 things you're going to look for or listen for when you're taking the test. Of course, after you hear the lecture, you're going to get the question. In this case, the question goes something like this. Using the examples of the fennec fox and the kangaroo rat, explain how some animals survive in desert environments. The phrasing of the question is always pretty similar, although there are some variations. It might specifically say, using the examples given in the lecture, explain how some animals survive in desert environments. But don't worry, no matter how the question is phrased, you're going to put together your answer in the exact same way. So don't pay too much attention to variations here. Before I show you my answer, I'll talk a little bit about taking notes. Now, I guess I'm not a very good teacher when it comes to explaining good ways to take notes. There's no secret to it, I guess. But basically for this task, I organized my paper with 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, just like I showed you a moment ago. I put the numbers in like even before I hear the lecture, and then I try to fill it in as I listen. And of course, you'll see if you pause the video and look at them, my technique is to use kind of short forms that I'll know like what's up, right? So instead of writing animals all in full, I'm just writing AMLS, and I kind of know what that means. Instead of writing desert environments, I write DES, environ. And when I give the answer, I'll know to use the full forms. But basically then I've got number 2, and I describe, what the first thing is, specialized heat regulation. And I have a few quick words about what that means. Then I have number 3, and I list the first example, which is the fennec fox. And then I have a few words there that kind of explains what, the details that go along with it are. Number 4, I mentioned the second thing. And then number 5, I mentioned the example that goes along with it. Now, I have to say here that your notes will never be 100% complete. I want you to practice using both notes and stuff that comes from your own head. And both of those sources are going to go into your answer. The notes will never have absolutely everything. It's just impossible to take notes that are that detailed. Keep that in mind as you practice. The only other technique, though, I generally recommend with notes is that immediately after the lecture is finished, I go back and I scribble in a few extra details that I kind of remember, but I know that I didn't take in the notes. So, and I've kind of said here, number 1, there's harsh conditions. And so I just kind of write the word harsh conditions in there. And then for specialized heat regulation, as I'm kind of glancing at them quickly, I realize, here's another detail. The temperatures are okay at night. Maybe that's relevant. I'll just scribble it in there. And then I remember, the holes that they live in, I remember from the lecture, they're massive. So I just kind of write in the word massive there. So in this way, I'm expanding and supplementing the notes with a few extra little details I remember immediately after the lecture is finished. And I guess here's the sample answer that I'll show you. In terms of structure, this is how I put it together. This is basically the template that I'm going to show you in a minute. I start by explaining what the 2 things are. I'm going to say the lecturer talks about 2 adaptations that help animals survive the harsh conditions of deserts, which include extreme heat and low water availability. And then I mention the first thing, and the way I structure it is I just say first he mentions that, and then I mention the first thing. For instance, and then I mention the first example. And then I want to mention the second thing, the second adaptation. So I say next he talks about how, and I describe that second thing. An example of this is, and then I describe that example. So that's what's going into the answer, right? I start by mentioning the 2 things, then the first thing and the example, the second thing and the example. That's the structure of the answer. And you can do this structure basically every time. There'll be slight variations maybe in how the question is designed or how the prompt looks, but this is the structure you can use basically all the time. In terms of things I've done to make this answer a little bit more sophisticated and high scoring, well, I've used some subordinating conjunctions, which, where, and then which again. This gives me more grammatical complexity. I don't want to turn this into a grammar lesson, but if you don't know what subordinating or coordinating conjunctions are, just take a minute and look it up. Here I've highlighted that there is a coordinating conjunction, so. It's giving me a little bit more grammatical complexity. Another thing is I've used the transition moreover. I mean, if you've seen all of my videos, I kind of love these transitional phrases, moreover, as a result, consequently, however. The template itself includes those phrases, so I don't have to go too crazy with them. But, you can see I've got first, for instance, next, an example of this. Those are all transitions that are just built right into the template. But I've added one more phrase here because it was convenient to use, moreover. And then I guess the next thing I should mention here is the template. Again, it's the same as in the answer, but I'll present it on the screen here for you. Just start by saying something like the lecturer talks about two, and then fill in the blank. Spend about 10 seconds introducing that part at the beginning. And then you're going to mention the first thing, the first change, the first adaptation, the first characteristic, the first advantage, the first disadvantage. Just using the phrase, first he mentions that, and then filling in the blank with your notes. For instance, and then you mention the matching example. Spend about 25 seconds on the first thing in the example. And then you're going to mention the second thing. Next, he talks about, fill in the blank from your notes. An example of this is, fill in the blank from your notes. And again, spend about 25 seconds on that. As you can see, I haven't put a conclusion in because I don't think it's necessary. And that's basically it. In terms of how your answer is scored, there's a few things to keep in mind. Of course, one of the most important things is the presence of correct and complete details, right? The examples have to be accurate. They have to be correct. You can't have stuff that's not mentioned in the lecture. You're also graded on your fluency, that is your speaking rate or speed, the presence of pauses, whether they're in the right place or the wrong place. The right place is at the end of the sentence. The wrong place for a pause is usually in the middle of a sentence. And you're also graded based on what I call stumbles or self-corrections, whether you kind of have to hunt around for a word or repeat yourself. You're judged, of course, based on your pronunciation. Specifically, I think the AI here looks at vowels and rhythm, that is your intonation. So kind of work on how you pronounce vowels. And of course, you're judged based on your grammar and your vocabulary. The grammar, of course, should be correct, but you also want some grammatical sophistication, which is what I talked about a moment ago with the conjunctions. You're also scored on your vocabulary. You want to avoid repeating words too many times. Now, in the integrated tasks, it can be a challenge, right? I probably use the word heat or temperature quite a few times in my answer. That's unavoidable, of course, when you're dealing with one of these technical topics, but try your best to avoid using the same word maybe like more than 3 times in the whole answer. Now, the most common topics that appear in this part of the test. I did a survey a few years ago of people who took it right here on the YouTube channel. I think about 500 people responded to the survey, and this is what they said. 60% of them got a topic related to like plants and animals. That's why I did this one in the video. That's really common. So make sure your practice questions have some of that content. Business and marketing is a very common topic, like 2 techniques that businesses use to sell a product to customers, something like that. 2 effects of television commercials on young people. Psychology and learning also comes up pretty commonly with 17%. And then lastly, about 6% of the people said they got something broadly related to art or history or literature. I know that's a lot, but that's kind of a catch-all. You know, for history, I think one topic might be something like 2 changes caused by the Industrial Revolution, something like that. I'll kind of leave you now with a few general tips that I give to all my students when I talk to them in person. First of all, most of your answer is describing the 2 things, like the 2 specific things, right? Like, don't focus too much of your answer just describing the concept. You really want to jump into the 2 things and the matching examples. As far as the template goes, I do encourage you to personalize it, make it work for you. You don't have to use the exact same words that I used. You could change some of the verbs. You could even just kind of adjust some of the word choices to make it more comfortable for you. You could make it shorter or longer depending on your preferences. See how it feels. As I said in earlier in the video, make sure to sprinkle in some transitional phrases and conjunctions. I won't repeat myself here, but it's very useful to get more grammatical complexity and better organization of your answer. I always, again, I'm sounding like a broken record here, but I always want you to expect 2 of something. Like here, it was 2 adaptations that help animals survive in the desert. In my video last year, it was 2 adaptations that help animals survive in dark environments. As I said before, it could be 2 techniques that businesses use to sell products to customers. 2 changes caused by the Industrial Revolution. I think in the official TOEFL book, there's one where it's like 2 definitions of money or 2 types of money. So that's what I really want you to expect. And with that in mind, I've put a big special star here. I really want you to use official practice resources. Basically, this is the question that most third-party books get wrong. Like, they get really wrong. The other day, I was referring, for example, to my Princeton Review TOEFL preparation book, and I was looking at the Type 4 speaking questions, and they were so far off from reality. So keep that in mind. I recommend official ETS stuff. And if you've got a third-party one you want me to check out to see if it's any good, just leave a comment down below. Finally, as I said earlier, you don't need a conclusion. This is a 1-minute response. You don't really have time for a conclusion. Just including the details from the lecture is going to take all of your time. And frankly, a conclusion would only be repetitive. You'd just be repeating stuff you already said. So don't worry about that. All right, I am going to leave it at that. But for more of this sort of stuff, you can check out my website, which is TOEFLresources.com. I'll put a link to that down in the video description. You can sign up for lessons with me if you want more help preparing for the test. And there's also guides to pretty much every section of the TOEFL. And there's a blog that I update every few days. Meanwhile, make sure to subscribe to the channel. I'm going to come back with a few more videos in the next few weeks. I think the next video is going to be the 2024 template video, where I just cut out all the junk and I just give you the templates, because frankly, those videos are what people want. Those get the most views. All right, so stay tuned for that. I'll talk to you all later. Take care of yourself, guys.